today in this IPR awareness program with universities on patenting for academic institutions with Goa College of Pharmacy, Panji. Thank you to all the panelists who have joined in today for this wonderful webinar. In order to give the inaugural welcome address, I would like to invite Dr. Vijay Kumar Shivpuje sir, who is the Director, Patlex Business Solutions and the IPR lead at ASSOCHAM, New Delhi. Sir, please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Kirti. On behalf of ASSOCHAM, ASSOCHAM IPFC in Delhi and Bangalore, I welcome everyone for this IPR awareness program, which has been conducted and funded by Government of India, Indian Patent Office. The intent of this particular program is to create awareness about intellectual property rights, especially in the young minds, students as well as faculty members. I welcome all the dignitaries here, Dr. Gopal Krishna Rao, Honorable Principal, Goa College of Pharmacy, Panji, Dr. Maithili Krishna, Assistant Professor, Department of Pharmacognosy, Goa College of Pharmacy, Panji, as well as Ms. Prachi Pratiti, Examiner of Patents and Design, Indian Patent Office, Government of India. I welcome all the participants, and I hope that this would be something which would be really fruitful for the careers of the students, the knowledge of intellectual property rights specifically. And I request everyone to participate, everyone to ask questions and get maximum mileage out of this particular event. Thank you and welcome once again. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for a wonderful welcome address. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Gopal Krishna Rao, the Honorable Principal, Goa College of Pharmacy. Before inviting sir, a brief introduction about him. Sir has a qualification in a PhD in pharmacy and a teaching experience of more than 30 years and a research experience of 26 years. He's also had undergone various research programs and has guided several people in their PhD research projects. He has delivered about 18 guest lectures and has about 90 scientific papers published. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Kindly go ahead, sir. Over to you.
Okay. Good afternoon. Thank you, Kirti, for your generous introduction. At the outset, I would like to thank ASSOCHAM and Sri Muhammad Alam Sahib, Joint Director, and his team, comprising of Bhavana Mittal and Prachi. And a special thanks to Vijay Kumar Shivpuje, who has consented to be a part of this event and is going to share lots of his experiences with our student community. At the outset, I would like to appreciate the efforts of ASSOCHAM in trying to propagate the most significant part of the research, that is IPR, and trying to understand the IPR and make the scientists, the budding scientists, aware of this significance of IPR and take it forward. Definitely, it's a wonderful step that you have taken, and I appreciate the sincere efforts of ASSOCHAM team. And having appreciated this, I would like to share some of the thoughts about our institution, which is the oldest pharmacy training institute. 1842, it started as a part of the Portuguese medical school called Escola da Medica, which was called as Escola da Farmaceutica. And then in 1963, after the independence of Goa, Goa liberation took place on 19th December 1961. And then after that, this college was renamed as Goa College of Pharmacy and is under the aegis of Government of Goa. And it's actually a standalone pharmacy college where we offer programs such as Diploma in Pharmacy of 2 years, Degree in Pharmacy of 4 years, Masters in Pharmacy in 4 different disciplines, and of course PhD as well, which we commenced in 2014. We have a wonderful alumni strength, almost 2,000 55 in undergraduate, that is B Pharma, and diploma almost 1800 students have completed, and in masters almost 300. In masters, only in pharmaceutical quality assurance itself, around 300 students have passed out. In pharmacology, around 80, and pharmacognosy 68, and PhD 3 people have successfully completed, and 20 of them have registered, of which 4 of them are full-time research scholars. Now, with this brief introduction and the rich history that we have, academic excellence, there is absolutely no doubt, and we have made enough impact in the national and international arena with regard to producing qualified and quality conscious graduates and postgraduates, and all our students are spread across the globe. And now that we are focusing more on the research activities, since the time that I'm here, since 2012, not that earlier it has not happened, but now we are going with full force. And after having started PhD, obviously a lot of collaboratory activities with the industries and various other research centers. Now the IP potential of our research, scientists here, research scholars, has increased considerably. Now I felt it is their time, right time, that we have to train our students and the faculty in the IPR related activities. In fact, we have a tie-up with an institute called Goa Center for Excellence in IPR, and we have been organizing annual national conventions every year with patent attorneys from USA and other parts of the globe are participating in that physically. Of course, last 2 years it was in hybrid mode because of this COVID pandemic situation. December 1st and 2nd, in fact, this year we had a wonderful number of delegates was there, and we also showcase the students research activities as a poster exhibition, and we award some students top 3 research posters with their, so that we can motivate students to take up quality research activities. And definitely most of us, what we try to do is we are technically very sound in our own area, but we lack the proper understanding with respect to the identification of intellectual property quotient in our research activity. Here is the place where ASSOCHAM and others can help us out in identifying the potential of a research activity and taking it forward to patent and then commercialize it for the benefit of society by and large. And whatever activities we do, it should have some social bearing. And in a government institution, economics play a vital role, and we have a fixed budget, which is there for us to spend on. But we sincerely thank and appreciate the efforts of Goa government, who are always very generous. We have been able to do quite a lot of good activities, and I'm sure with the industry support as well, we will be able to make bigger strides and reach out to maximum number of general public with our inventions and novelties and innovations. And when we talk of innovations, you know very well that the having knowledge and having the technical skills to arrive at a novel project is one thing, but how to take it forward and commercialize it or make it available to the public is another thing. And this is where we can play a vital role when we are having such collaborative activities. And I'm sure with the expert panelists that we have here, they will all be able to share appropriately the expertise and also orient all our students in understanding what is IPR, how to generate IPR, how to go about it, and then what is arbitration, and how do we carry forward all these IPR related activities. First and foremost is to identify the IP potential and then take it forward so that we can really commercialize R. In other words, like Edward Jenner started with a vaccine, and then he said, we will not go in for patent because it's going to be useful for the humankind. So those kind of things where the society gets large amount of benefits out of our research activities, we will have to identify that and make sure that all our science knowledge in science is benefiting the general public as a whole. And with this few words, I am sure that all my students will be getting lot of take-home messages with the after the interaction with our expert panelists here, and I'm sure ASSOCHAM will continue to deal with Goa College of Pharmacy, which is one of the oldest pharmacy training institute in Southeast Asia, not just India alone. Southeast Asia, I'm sure we can make things visible and a lot of benefit can be drawn out of these kind of mutual interactions and collaborations. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your kind words. It's really appreciable to be associated with such a great institute. To continue further, I would like to invite our next panelist, Ms. Prachi Pratiti, Examiner of Patents and Designs, Intellectual Property Office, New Delhi. A brief introduction about her. She has completed her BSc Honours in Chemistry from Hansraj College, University of Delhi, and Masters in Chemistry from Faculty of Sciences, University of Delhi, and she also holds a Japanese patent from Japan. She has a research exposure at various premier institutions like IIT Delhi and IIT Madras. Ma'am, it's a great pleasure to have you today. Kindly go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kirti. So, without any delay, I'll directly start with my presentation. And before that, very warm good afternoon to everybody. Thank you, ASSOCHAM, Mr. G.K. Rao, Mr. Vijay, and Ms. Bhavna for having me as a panelist. And without further ado, let me just share my presentation. Is it visible to the viewers?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
So I'm Prachi Pratiti, Examiner of Patents and Designs, IPO Delhi. Today I'm going to walk you all through the patent filing to grant process, and it is also giving you a sneak peek to the psyche of an examiner while he or she is examining the patents, what is expected out of the applicants or inventors. And this is not just going to be a one-way process. Through this presentation, we would like you to have a sneak peek at the patent office's functioning in our psyche. At the same time, we would like to take in views of the inventors and the applicants in the end of the session. So all of you must have heard about properties, right? And all of you must be knowing, what property is. Most of you relate to it through immovable or movable property, which can be felt, which can be measured, right? But very few of us know what actually intellectual property means. All right, you can understand two things, that intellectual property is a type of intangible property. This means it cannot be measured directly. All right, and intellectual property is made up of two words. One is intellectual, the other one is property. All right, so today we are going to talk about one type of intellectual property, which is the patents. All right. So what do we actually understand by intellectual property? Now, the word consists of intellect, means something which is emanating from human mind. All right. So what emanates from human mind? Creative ideas, expressions. And when does it become an intellectual property is when it has some sort of commercial value to it, economic significance to it. All right. Like other properties, intellectual property is an asset. All right, it can be, bought, sold, licensed, exchanged, traded like any other form of property. Now, why patents, why do we need to protect them? What is the need, So what is it actually? It is an exclusive privilege or the right which the government of a particular territory, a sovereign, gives you in return of you as applicants or inventors, disclosing your inventions to us. All right. And it is given for 20 years from the date of filing, and we expect full disclosure in terms of specification, in terms of drawings, in terms of other pictorial representation. Now, who can apply it? Is it only the inventors who can apply it, or there can be legal representatives? You know, there are so many people who can apply for patents. You can directly apply for patents, you know. And when you as inventor applies for patents, you are called as true and first inventor. All right. And you can also assign somebody, you know, some entity to claim your patent. It can be a company, it can be an institution. All right. And if suppose the person unfortunately dies in the process, then his legal representative can also apply for the patents on his behalf. Okay. And patents can be applied both alone and jointly. Now, this is just a sneak peek. What happens is most of us, we think that we will have to visit the patent office to go and, file forms, give fees. No, actually, the process is quite simple. You need to go to the IP India website, and there is a tab called as Comprehensive E-Filing Portal, which looks exactly like it is given in the slide. When you're opening your Gmail account, you need to first register it, or any account. It's like opening your account here on this portal. You will be given a login ID and password, and if you have your digital signatures with you, you can file an e-copy of all those compulsory forms. You can submit the fee, and you know, all this process hardly takes 1 to 2 hours maximum. Now, before we delve deeper into the patent process, you know, from filing to the grant, what is the journey? There are certain points which we need to remember, because as examiners, we have seen that there are applicants and investors who make certain, certain blunders, I would say, and because of certain nitty-gritties, their patent is rejected, or there is delay in processing the patent application. The first point is very important. That is, please first file for a patent and then go for a publishing elsewhere. So the basic idea is that do not share or display your invention, publicly, even in the oral form. Please keep it away from, your colleagues, your friends. Keep it safe with you. Disclose it first to the sovereign, that is the Intellectual Property Office. Okay. And one thing more, before we discuss what exactly is the invention, is that one patent can cover only one invention. Most of the times we have seen that the patent application tries to claim multiple inventions, okay, for whatever the reason may be. But make sure your chances of getting a patent is quite high, and it can happen timely if you claim for one invention only. Now, what exactly do we mean about invention? There is a confusion between, what is a discovery, what is an invention, what is an innovation. So our Patent Act very clearly defines what is invention. And when, as applicants, as students, as future scientists, you understand what we mean by invention, your chances of getting a patent is quite high. Okay, so you will see that there are three criteria when we are defining an invention. First is a new product or a process. This pertains to novelty. Okay. The other one is it should have an inventive step. And lastly, it should have some economic significance and industrial application. So today you have a new product. It might have some sort of inventive step to it. We'll see in the subsequent slide what novelty and inventive step means, but you do not have an economic significance attached to it. It might not be feasible to manufacture it. So it cannot be called as an invention. So these three properties are prerequisites to be called as an invention. Okay, now what do we understand about novelty? It is a very simple concept, something which is new. what do we understand about newness? Something which has never been heard of, never been disclosed in any prior art. Now, prior art is a very technical term, but the definition is quite easy. It is anything and everything which is published, presented, or otherwise discussed or disclosed in the public domain before you are filing your patent application. And interestingly, why we tell you to keep your invention or your idea behind the invention very safe is because a disclosure, even implicitly, which means indirect disclosure, can be treated as a prior art. Okay. Now we were talking about the second feature of invention, which is called as inventive step. Inventive step means that your invention should have some sort of technical advancement over the existing knowledge and should have the economic significance attached to it. Now in the slide, you will see two terms, which is non-obviousness and person skilled in the art. So before we get into the details of what do we understand about non-obviousness and person skilled in the art, we must tell you that how do we judge an inventive step. We take your complete specification which discloses the invention as a whole. We do not study it part by part. Okay, so if suppose your invention, alleged invention, has three features, A, B, and C. Okay, A and B are already known, but C has a step of technical advancement, and A, B, C together make some invention which is a significant improvement over the prior art. Then we treat the invention as a whole. We do not outrightly reject, and this is a common myth that the patents get rejected because the components are already known. If some of the components are already known, but then there is addition of a particular component which improves the entire process or improves the product significantly over the previously disclosed products, then we take invention as a whole. Okay, and definitely we mosaic. This means that when we are examining inventive step, we take multiple documents into consideration, because the information is scattered between certain patent literatures, non-patent literatures, and after combining these literatures, these prior arts, if we think we are able to come to the conclusion that your application is obvious. This is what obviousness means. Your application is obvious. It can be inferred from the previously disclosed prior arts that, a particular, say, device which you have invented, or which you claim to invent, to have been invented, when you can find it in multiple documents, and you can infer, like, I am a person skilled in the art. All right, so I have that technical knowledge, and if according to me, I'm able to come to your invention, then your invention does not have an inventive step. It lacks inventive step. Okay, now what do we mean by non-obviousness? There are certain features, it's a very subjective term, but there are certain features which are attached to non-obviousness. One thing is that it should have an unexpected effect. There should be an element of surprise. There should be a solution to a long-standing problem. For example, if today we are able to find a an anti-cancer drug, it's a long-standing problem and which is cheaper to manufacture and has great therapeutic efficacy with minimum side effects, then it is non-obvious, right? So how do we assess inventive step all in all? So first thing is, what do we need? We need a person skilled in the art to assess it. If suppose you do not have the domain specific knowledge, you cannot assess the inventive step. So you require a resource person. That is the person skilled in the art. Then I talked about mosaicing the documents. So after mosaicing certain documents, you come to the conclusion there are something which is called as common general knowledge. There are certain laws, there are certain, common things which we like. I'm from chemical background, so chemistry has, and it cannot be patented. You can judge it as a person skilled in the art. And then, most importantly, in the patent document, while you're filing a complete specification, we as examiners look for a certain paragraph here. That paragraph is the one where you are citing the difference between the prior arts already there and your invention. And you are trying to establish that how your invention is better and is more promising than the already known inventions. Okay, so these type of differences guides us. They are the guiding light to the examiner to assess whether your invention has an inventive step or not. Okay, so we talked about inventive step here. We talked about novelty. We talked about economic significance. Economic significance is what? Something which can be manufacturable, which can be brought into a form or a shape, which can have a commercial value. Novelty is what? Which is new, which has not been disclosed anywhere. So we just require one particular document if we want to kill the novelty. Unlike inventive step, we do not require the mosaicing of documents. All right. Now, starting at, coming to the main thrust area of today's discussion is how basically the patent processing filing is done from the first step to the last step. Kindly concentrate on the screens. So there are three ways where you can apply for patents. The first is the PCT. It is a patent cooperation treaty. The second is convention application. And the third one is ordinary. At this stage, we would primarily like to focus on ordinary process. All right. So what happens is that in ordinary process, you can file your patent application in two ways. The first is a provisional specification, which is a very, very strong tool in the hands of applicants and inventors. I will discuss this in detail. And then there is complete specification, where you're disclosing almost everything about your alleged invention, which also we will see in details, and how, we should draft the complete specification so that it's clear and its chances of getting a patent is high. So if suppose there is a provisional specification which merely gives a broad outline of your invention without basically giving the working examples or the working of your invention, is the provisional application. We give you 12 months of time to file a complete specification. Okay. Once you've filed the complete specification, after the expiry of 18 months, we publish it. Okay, and there are certain rules and sections. We don't need to get into the details of it. What is more important is to understand the flowchart better. Okay, so after 18 months have expired, it comes into the examiner's module. Okay, so request of, just a minute. Can you see the slide changing?
No, Prachi.
No, ma'am.
Okay. Just give me a moment.
Miss Prachi, your bandwidth is low, so you can switch off your video and then you can share.
Can you provide me with the sharing rights?
Sharing rights are with you only.
The option is disabled actually.
Ma'am, please stop sharing and share again.
Yeah, I did that already.
Please share now, ma'am.
The option is still disabled. Right,
Please share.
right. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Right, so I beg your pardon for the technical glitch from my end. Resuming the session again, so I will refrain from using the slideshow option because it's creating a problem here. So we were on request for examination. So what happens is that you need to fill up a form where you are requesting that after the publication of your application, you want the application to be examined. So after the request has been made, it comes into the examiner module. That is my module. Okay, I can see every form, fee, and your complete specification. Okay, after examining it, then we issue FER. You know, it is the first examination report. And we raise certain objections, or there are certain, we want certain things to be amended from the applicant's side, and he is given 6 months of time. Just in case there is a delay, then he can apply for 3 months additional by simply filing form 4. Okay, and after the amendments have been done by the applicant, it again comes into our module and we check it again if everything has been complied to. And after that, based on the amendments which are made by the applicants, we send it to the controller, who's the supervising authority. Now the ball is in his court to decide whether to grant it, reject it, or there can be a hearing. In all these stages, there are certain oppositions which can be made, and we will discuss about what type of oppositions which can be made. Because of those oppositions, what happens is that the patent process gets delayed, and we have hearing of the patent, which should be processed further. Okay. So giving you a sneak peek that we are a group of, there are 4 specialization of examiners. In case you are thinking of joining our office as patent examiner, then we have 4 specialized fields. One is the chemical and pharmaceutical sciences. The second is the biotechnology and related inventions. Then we have mechanical and civil engineering, and electronics and electrical engineering. In chemical and pharmaceutical sciences, we also look after the patents which are coming from polymer sciences. Okay. Now we had discussed the basic and the broad outline of the process, but there is a very important part which is called the screening and classification. So first, when you have filed your application, it goes through this sort of screening and classification. In the previous slide, I discussed that there are 4 specialized branches of examiners. So what file should come to which examiner's module? This section which takes care of screening and classification does that for us. And at the same time, there can be certain patent applications which have inventions indirectly or directly related to certain metals, certain materials which can be used as atomic energy. And such type of applications have to be screened. Such type of applications where there is a use of radioactive material, it has to be screened. It is screened through this department, and then we write to the Department of Atomic Energy. We wait for their approval that this and this application does not contain explicitly those contents which require certain obstruction from DAE and certain stoppage from the side of DAE. And after the clearance has been given by DAE, we go ahead and examine the application. This entire process takes time. It is not time bound because it depends on the other department, but there are chances that within a stipulated amount of time these applications get processed and we are able to give an answer to the applicant. Okay, so there are also certain sections where the application might not even get published. Leave the examination. So we talked about, if we see this slide, we talk about, publishing under section 11A after the expiry of 18 months. So at this stage itself, there can be no publishing. Why? Our country, it's a sovereign nation, and there are certain directions which are given by the central government where there can be a threat to the national security, and there can be some inventions which cannot be disclosed to the public. It can lead to some sort of chaos. It can threaten the national security of our nation. So such type of secrecy which needs to be maintained under section 35, such type of inventions are not published or made public. And the second is that if they are abandoned, if at all even complete specification is not filed at all, then it is abandoned. It is considered to be abandoned under section 9. And then the other one is that it is withdrawn by the applicant himself 3 months prior to the publication. Now, in all these matters, the patent office is quite cooperative. We try to refund. In fact, we do refund 90% of the fee if the request is made before the first first FER, first examination report has been issued. Okay. Now we talked about in the previous slide the why it is not getting published. So on our modules we see status of patent application. One, which is abandoned, that is if certain timelines are not complied to, then it is deemed to be abandoned. And if suppose the complete specification which contains so many things, your drawings, your disclosure of complete invention, the claims, etc. So if it is not filed within 1 year of the provisional specification, it is automatically deemed to be abandoned, or it is willingly withdrawn after signing a withdrawal form of Form 29. Okay. Or it is refused. It can be refused on many grounds, which we will discuss in the subsequent slide. And the fourth status is, which is a very straightforward one, which is granted. Okay. So now there is a common myth that patent applications take a lot of time in India to be processed. There are only very few reasons why patent applications take so much of time. The first thing is that there can be objections, there can be opposition from the other party. All right, and our law gives equal opportunity of the opponents to be heard. The second thing is that there can be a procedural mistake by the applicant himself. And trust me, I'm telling you, in most of the cases, this is the primary reason. All right. And that is why in today's discussion, today's presentation, we are going to discuss how to increase your chances to get a patent by understanding the entire process very nicely. Now, suppose you are in a hurry to protect your invention, your idea, and you know that your opponent is very closely working upon that idea and he may come up with something better, or if not the same thing. So what you do is that there is a form called as Form 9, and it can be filed by the applicants. We publish your patent within 1 month of you filing the Form 9, and there is an appropriate fee, and the fee details and the form details are all written in the IP India site. Okay. And just in case you think that you are in further hurry, you want even the examination process also to be expedited, then what to do? So, there is a form called as Form 18A, and it will help you to get your application examined in a very short period of time. Okay, so who can file the expedited examination form? So the first thing is that we have a Startup India mission, and to boost the startup culture in our country, startups can do it, small entities can do it. If one or more applicant, in case of joint application, is a female, she can file an expedited examination. Departments of the government and other government establishments can also file for an expedited examination. And this point is a further technical one. I will not get into the details of it. So there are certain, if India is an ISA, International Search Authority, under Patent Cooperation Treaty, then expedited examination can be done. Now we have understood certain technicalities of the patent application process. Now I'm going to take you through to what happens when the application comes into the examiner module. What we check first is the formal requirement for patent filing. So you can see in your screens that there are certain mandatory forms like Form 1, 2, 3, 18, 28. So these are forms which have to be filled by every category of applicant, and it has to be filled up with utmost clarity. Every field which is mandatory has to be filled. Most of the time, surprisingly, it is not filled up or not filled up timely. There are certain timelines also, and those timelines provide you with, they are very flexible. The entire thing can be done in a flexible period of time. So please stick to the timelines, because most of the applications have objections in the formal requirement for patent filing. And I will also show you in the subsequent slides what these forms look like. Okay, so Form 1 is basically, the details of the applicants and the inventors, and there is service of address if in case you have a patent agent who's doing the processing of your application and communication from your end. Then there is Form 2. When you are disclosing your complete specification, you file it along with Form 2. We will see in the later slides. Form 3 is if in case you have done some foreign filing of your patent, then we need an information to it. And Form 18, which is without which your application will not be examined. And Form 1 and 18 should be filled up very carefully, and the details should match with each other. Most of the times, the details of Form 1 and Form 18 do not match with each other, and on these grounds, a big objection to your patent application can be put up. Okay, and also filing for the right fee. Form 28 is exclusively for the startups and small entities. We require certain certificates from DPIIT, as just telling us there should be a certification that this particular entity is a startup. Other optional forms are there, especially form 26 I would like to talk about. In case you have hired a patent agent, so we require a form 26. It is a legal document, it is a stamped document, and there the applicant basically authorizes the patent agent or a group of patent agent to have communication with the IPO, with the Intellectual Property Office, with regards to your patent application at every stage. Okay, so he acts on behalf of you. We have discussed about provisional to complete specification timeline. We've also discussed about within how much time period FER should be replied. But we should really discuss about Form 3, Form 5. What is Form 3 is the foreign filing. It should come into examiner's module within 6 months of your filing the application. Okay, and there is a Form 5 also. Form 5 is nothing but declaration of inventorship. Okay, who are the inventors by the applicants? So that should be done within 1 month of you filing the application. Now I will show you a sample, Form 1 sample, as you can see in your screens. So here what happens is every detail of the applicant and the inventor is given in Form 1, and we treat it as a base form. So any discrepancy or mismatch between Form 1 or any other form is always compared by examiners. So make sure that you take into account the details of Form 1 and then subsequently fill your other mandatory or optional forms. So here you can see that we ask for what type of application it is. Then we require full details of applicants. We require his nationality, his country of residence, etc. And then we also require the name of the inventors. Okay, and the title of the invention in very clear words. And now, you can just concentrate on the 7th section, which is address for service of applicants in India. So here what happens is, in case you have a patent firm or patent agent from a particular firm, his details are given in, module section 7. And we require his email ID also. In case email ID is missing, Form 1 is not processed. So you have to make sure that Form 1 is filed in a complete and comprehensive manner. Okay, there are certain fee which is attached to it, and you would see that the fee are very nominal. It is given in the first schedule of our patent rules 2003, and right now all the educational institutions have a very nominal fee at par with natural persons or startups. So the benefits are accrued, benefits related to 80% of reduction of fee can be availed by all the educational institutions according to the recent amendment which is made. Okay, so this is about the formal requirement. So please make sure that you have all your forms completely filled up, comprehensively filled up. There are 5-6 forms only, and corresponding fee is also paid. That's about it. And you know what, if you get your formal requirement right, you are almost, in fact, more than halfway through. Okay, now there are certain technical requirements. What happens is that in case you do not have a working example, all right, and you know that your idea has huge economic significance and great potential of technical advancement. Now, in these cases where you are not able to, give us the working examples, in that case, what we tell you is that come to the office, submit all the mandatory forms to us and file for a provisional specification. We wait for the applicant for 1 year to get his working examples in place. We can ask for certain models also, certain pictorial representation, but he is given 1 year of time period. Okay. Now, this is the most important point, a slide of my presentation here, because it has a lot of element of subjectivity. Now, complete specification has certain sections, all right, and if you have divided your application, I'm also briefly discussing how to draft a patent here, even though I'm not a particular, the authorized resource person to do it, but this is what we expect out of the applicant. So the first thing is, please get your title right. Your title should tell us what your invention is about. Most of the times we get titles like polymer, the polymer, then titles like a cheap polymer. So, these titles do not tell us the specificity of your invention. So the first thing when we read your complete specification is the title. It should be self-explanatory, and we require it to be within 15 words, not a very detailed title. Okay. And then you give the background on of the invention. Here in this section, what we actually see is that what are the available prior art of your invention in the field of your invention. Okay, then there is brief summary, of course. Now, this section is very important, and we spend a lot of time studying the D section, which is the detailed description of the invention. We basically, what we are looking for in the patent application is that how clearly and how comprehensively you have described the invention. When we keep on examining the patent application, anything which is vague is bad, because it gets into a psyche that the applicant or the inventor himself is not sure of what he's claiming. And we are looking for something which is comprehensive. We are looking for something which is specific. So in these things, we basically look for specificity through your examples, through your working examples, through a tabular chart, because these things they indicate specificity, they indicate clarity. And further, if you can provide a drawing, a pictorial representation, especially in terms of devices, then it adds to further clarity. And this is the section where we do not need a 300-page story for it to comprehensively describe it. If you know your invention properly, you can very precisely, present it in few words, and we can easily understand it. Okay, now coming to the claims section. This is another most important part, and mostly what happens is that the claims are not drafted properly, and we do not, what you want to be claimed and what should be communicated to us, there is a huge gap most of the time. So what we are looking for, just like description, we are looking for certain words, certain keywords, like which can, which defines the scope. So there are words like, at least, more than, less than. So they are not clear, they are not definite, they are not precise. What we are looking for are ranges, a concentration range, a temperature range. So it shows the clarity, of the inventor or the applicant, that this is what he's claiming for. This is the working parameters. These are the concentration limits. So this, these type of claims are called as good claims. Your chances of getting a patent by being more specific are very high, because what it depicts, it depicts clarity, it depicts conciseness. Okay. And then, I will give you a very wonderful point which might help you in filing and increasing your chances of getting a patent, is that the first claim, the rule is that the first claim is the most important claim. The first claim is treated as the most comprehensive and an independent claim. If you are able to draft your first claim in a very clear manner by clearly defining the process, by defining the product, the features of the product, and in the subsequent claims, you are able to relate to your claim one, going back to claim one again and again through subsequent claims, then your claims are called to be good and well drafted. Okay. Now, the last section is the abstract. Well, there is no rocket science to it. We just want the abstract to be very precise. Only the features of technical advancement and only technical features should be disclosed. Kindly refrain from, the use or the application of that process and just disclose the technical disclosure. It is called as a good abstract. Okay, then there are other procedural aspects also, which I will discuss in brief. So we talked about amendment, right? In the first examination report, what happens is we put up certain objections. I've told you that we look for two types of objections. One is the formal objection, the second one is the technical objection. And after we have raised those objections, we are basically looking for an amended application. Okay, that is the first point. And then second is there can be voluntary amendments done by the applicant himself. In case, there is certain change in the address of service or the nationality, file in Form 13. There is a nominal fee to it. And if suppose you want your claims to be deleted, then also you can file up Form 13 for the same thing. Okay. Now, one thing which should be kept in mind here is that when you can delete your claims, but you cannot significantly alter your claims and altogether amend your claims in such a way that it does not relate to the complete specification, then your entire application will not be considered. And there can be huge delays in the processing of your patent, because it in itself is not a good practice, not an ethical practice. So make sure that if you are doing certain amendments to the claims, they are only amendments for wordings, etc. Okay. Now, opposition, it in itself is a very big topic. This is one of the reasons that patent applications are, in limbo for years altogether. And I'm going to discuss it in a very brief way as possible, because it in itself is a huge topic. So we have oppositions of two kinds. After the amendment in 2005, we have two kinds. One is the pre-grant opposition. The other one is the post-grant opposition. Now, pre-grant, as the word in itself is, speaking for itself, it is filed after the patent application has been published, but before the grant. And it can be filed by any person. Any person, this means that, you may not be directly related, you might not be from that particular field. You can be any person. And then there is a form to it. There is absolutely no filing fee attached to it. And the appeal lies in the hands of the controller, and there are hearings which are done. The examiner also sits in the hearing, and he or she has his own case study to it, and it influences the decision which is taken by the controller. Now, post grant, the difference here is that it can be filed within 1 year of grant. So within 12 months of the grant of patent, the post-grant opposition applications or the request is taken up, and it can be filed by the person who is interested, who is representing that domain, who has certain commercial or scientific interest in that particular area. So only that person can file. There is a filing fee attached to it. and there can be absolutely no appeal in case there is a post-grant opposition. So whatever has been decided in the hearing is the final word. Okay. What can be the grounds of opposition? So as talked in the previous slides, that please make sure that you disclose it to the patent office first and not to any public arena, public domain. So publicly, if it gets known, then there can be opposition. If there are certain biological materials attached to it, then there can be grounds of objection. If you have obtained it wrongfully, you might have just sneaked into somebody's lab and would have taken certain data. And there are then legal actions also attached to it. There are certain penal actions attached to it. And if you have published it, suppose you have a research paper, you've published it there, then there can be opposition. And likewise, there can be opposition in case you have not sufficiently disclosed it. You have disclosed it under certain, only certain parts of it. And most importantly, in our country, I would specifically like you to focus on traditional knowledge. Our country is rich in, biodiversity and traditional knowledge attached to it. And we have a section called as Section 3 and Section 3P, where traditional knowledge, whatever is there in the domain of traditional knowledge cannot be patented. It is something which is very dear to the indigenous community of our country. It is already there in the public domain, so you cannot get a patent for that. It is absolutely non-patentable. Okay, and then also if there are certain timelines which you have missed, there can be opposition. And of course, at the last, if there is some inventiveness which is lacking, we discussed the 3 grounds of inventive concept. So if one of the grounds is also lacking, there can be a ground of opposition. So just summing the entire procedure, the first thing is when it comes into the examiner module, in a detail we classify it. During this time, pre-grant opposition proceedings also go through. Then there is formal examination, as I talked about, pertaining to forms and fees. There is technical examination. We are looking comprehensively at the complete specification, claims, drawings, abstracts, etc. And then we report it to the controller through FERs. There is review process by the controller, and it can be directly granted, or there can be hearing in case there are certain amendments which we require and those conditions have not been fulfilled. All right, so this is the entire process. Here, hearing can be based on certain oppositions and objections. In fact, if there is some serious, objection and opposition, it can even be refused. But the percentage of patents which are getting refused in the past 2 to 3 years is minimal in our office. Okay. And then after you have amended the application and necessary amendments are made, and there is a, there's a sort of understanding between the controller and the examiner that it should be passed, then, again, your patent is granted. And in case there is no reply, your application is deemed to be abandoned. And thankfully, if your application gets granted and you are given a patent certificate in this form with the logo of our Government of India, IP India logo, and you can see a barcode, also a specialized barcode, and a patent number is granted to you. All right, and the date of filing is written and the name of the patentee is also written here, along with certain details like your title and other things. Okay, so finally you get a patent. So this is about the event. Okay, and the presentation. Kindly ask me questions. Before that, I would like to just ask whether I'm audible.
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
All right. Okay. So the first thing is that if you allow me, I would also like to put up certain questions to the audience.
Yes, please. Yeah.
Okay. So can someone just briefly, looking at this slide, reiterate for me or revise the type of procedure, examination procedure, just in brief, so that I understand that some understanding has been established. Anybody? Is somebody willing? Is there an understanding of this sort?
Just before that, Kirti,
Right.
are the participants allowed to unmute themselves?
No, sir, I think that
Okay.
isn't possible. But
Yeah.
however, they can mention it in the chat box if interested.
Right. Please do mention in the chat box. I will also take up the question in the chat box and keep on replying to it.
That
In
would be
case
great.
there is any, problem in understanding or certain doubts or anything from the presentation and otherwise also.
I request all the participants to kindly answer the question in the chat box and also to mention their questions in the chat box so that they can be taken by the panelists.
Right. So, finally, I would like to thank my co-panelist and especially ASSOCHAM for giving us the platform to interact with the universities and such esteemed universities with such an illustrious history, which is the Goa College of Pharmacy. Congratulations to the university for hosting such an event. It is a privilege even for us to connect with an esteemed institution like this and a platform like ASSOCHAM. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's a privilege to have you here today, and thank you so much for delivering such a great lecture. So moving ahead, and now I would once again like to welcome Dr. Vijay Kumar Shivpuje sir for a brief lecture. But before that, a brief introduction. He is currently the director, Patlex Business Solutions, which is a knowledge process outsourcing firm practicing in patents and designs. He is the IPR lead at IPFC SHM New Delhi. And he's also the mentor of change with Government of India's Niti Aayog Atal Tinkering Labs. And he's a registered patent agent at the Indian Patent Office with M.Pharmacy degree with LLB also. He has over 16 plus years of experience in pharma corporates, law firms and consultancies, and has conducted over 100 plus IPR awareness programs at various colleges, universities, bar associations, incubation centers, industry chambers, and MSMEs. Sir, over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kirti. Kirti, can you allow me to share the screen, please? Deepak ji. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Prachi, for delivering that wonderful session and taking us through the entire process of patenting from filing to grant. It was a kind of I would say, a thorough process that we understood in a very simple and lucid language actually. And I'm pretty confident that all the students and the faculties or researchers would definitely get benefited by that. I'm going to speak on IPR policy, intellectual property rights policy. Just allow me to share my screen. Okay, just to confirm, Kirti, can you see my screen, please?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm going to discuss about IP policy for academic institutions. In the inaugural speech, the honorable principals are mentioned about various activities that are happening at the institution, Goa College of Pharmacy, as well as the focus on more of research as well as the commercialization of the research. But then, unfortunately, I would say, not only with the government, but even the private institutions as well, there has not been much of the clarity with respect to the legal uh, ownership, or I would say clarity about how to handle those situations when we speak about IP, be it protection, be it enforcement, or be it licensing, basically. I'm going to discuss few of these things with some live examples because as I have been practicing, getting a lot of inquiries or queries, or I would say rather different kind of situations wherein it is very difficult to handle those, like specifically with respect to the enforcement or filing of the IPR actually. Now, this is just a summary, like the uh, uh, path for the entire presentation. What is an IP policy? What it should contain? How is it useful for the institution? And what are the best IPR innovation practices as well? So for me, like it's been last 5 years. I have been working with the different academic institutions from pharma, non-pharma as well. Have been associated with like some of the premier most institutions in India from pharma institutions like Bombay College of Pharmacy, or from science we have the Saint Xavier's College, Mumbai, as well as Hansraj College. Delhi University. We've been associated with a lot of IP activities, and we are realizing that there is a kind of a fundamental, I would say, lack of awareness with respect to intellectual property rights, as well as the way it has to be identified, the way it has to be protected, the way it has to be commercialized, the way it has to be licensed out. And with this all experience, I would say, with working with the private universities, government universities, autonomous institutions, as well as private institutes, like as well as working with the researchers, master students, undergraduate students as well. We come across lot of I would say opportunities as well in terms of streamlining the processes for the protection to entire enforcement as such. Now, what is IP policy? Before that, like I have some uh, taste cases as such, like as I said, wherein we face these kind of issues. I think we at least have two faculties here, Dr. Maithili and Dr. Rajeshri. Like they would definitely agree that, like we have these kind of cases happening around. The first such case is, or like we are trying to identify the answers to these basically. One of the research student files a patent for an invention without informing the institute. What can we do as an academic institution in that case? Is it mandatory for the researcher or a student to inform about the invention or patent filing to the institution? To be honest, we don't have the things streamlined at the academic institutions. Those institutions who do not have the IPR policy in place, the students can definitely do that. Okay, as a individual basically. Now, unfortunately, since we may not know when did the student file the application, when was it prosecuted and getting granted. So there is a way out to legally tackle it, but then it is always recommended to avoid these kind of things. Let me tell you one case which happened 3 years back with me. One of the students, master students, called me up, and she mentioned that she had to file a patent application. I said, fine, we'll sign a CDA, share the invention, and we'll file the patent application. Beyond that, I asked her, who are the inventors for that? And therein she told me that, sir, the problem herein is that I don't want to include my research guide's name. Whoever is a research guide, I don't want to include the name of that guide. Now, as I asked her, why is it so? Why don't you want to include the name of your research guide in the patent application? Of course, she had some reasons for that. But then, is it allowed first of all? And how are you going to stop that? Okay. Patent office would not ask you where is the invention carried out. Rather, if there is any, I would say, legal problem with respect to the ownership, there is a mechanism within the patent office, as well as you have to do, if it's granted, you have to do it through code basically. Now this situation uh, gives us a kind of, I would say, it's a kind of an that particular case was an eye opener for me to tell the institutions, okay, you need to have something in paper as a policy, just like what we have as a salary policy, attendance policy, leave policy. Can we have an IPR policy in place basically? Right, and that is what, and it is helpful for everyone. It's helpful for the institution, it's helpful for the faculties, it's helpful for the researcher, it's helpful for even the students as well. And how is it helpful? Because it creates a transparent system within the ecosystem, within academic institution, which would help everyone, as well as it would avoid the kind of ambiguity, or I would say uncertainty, each of the invention may have at the patent office with respect to the ownership. Now this is one of the cases. Another case, and I'm pretty confident this happens many a times, an ex-employee leaves the organization, and this is common even in corporates. Ex-employee leaves the employee leaves the organization and takes the research know-how and publishes a research paper with the new institute or new organization, or files a patent with a new organization. What is the way out actually? Okay, so in this case as well, I would say, of course, there are legal ways out, but and then, as it is always said, prevention is always better than tackling it legally later. That's the reason. That's the reason we need to have something called intellectual property rights policy. Rather, a few years back, MHRD, now what we call as the MOE, Ministry of Education, came up with a draft IPR policy for an academic institution, wherein it provides certain guidelines with respect to patenting, patent filing, patent ownership, as well as patent enforcement as well. And most of the bigger institutions, the so-called first-year institutions, like what we have as IITs or NIPERs or IISCs, IISCs and all, they all have got their IPR policies in place. And now I think it's the right time. If the institution doesn't have an IPR policy, we need to have that policy actually in place. Another case is wherein a professor files a patent application. The institute provides a legal funding for the filing of the patent. The now invention gets commercialized. Who take the licensing fees? Is it the institute or the professor? Who owns it? Legally owned. Legal ownership is one thing, but beyond that, the contribution of inventor, what we also, in some of the countries, we also have that inventor remuneration act kind of stuff, which is, of course, we don't have it right here in India. But then, if a inventor or an applicant or a professor is contributing to invention, does he have any stake in the licensing fees if the invention is commercialized? That is more important. And I would say nothing works like monetary benefits or financial benefits for as a motivation for any of the faculties or researchers per se. But then, how can we actually have the clarity on this? I have another case. A pharmacy professor, what you do is beyond your office hours, develop provide consultancy and develop some IP, which is in the pharmaceutical field. He or she files a patent and gets it commercialized. Now, the only difference herein is the pharmacy professor has developed or conducted that particular research outside office hours, but it's into the pharma field only. Does the institute have any legal right over the invention now? This again a very tricky question, because at the upfront we may say that if it's beyond office hours, the institution doesn't have any role or any legal right over it. But if we deep dive into the facts of the particular invention, then we may realize that the concepts or the basic ideas were maybe connected to the research that is being carried out in the institution. That is the first thing. And second thing, it may be just an application of what you have learned during your research during office hours, basically, right? And second thing, of course, this works more with the corporates as well, is the concept of conflict of interest. So when you are an employee of a government organization, if you're an employee of a government institution or even private institute for that sake, when you're a full-time employee getting your salary at that point of time without written permission, you cannot get involved into anything which is conflicting with respect to your job. And that's where the conflict of interest comes into play. And in this case, the conflict of interest is very clear. Reason being, what you're doing outside office hours is exactly in the same field, right? Now, let us try to understand another case wherein now the same pharmacy professor, what he does beyond office hours, he develops an invention into telecom field now, not into the pharmaceuticals. Is there a conflict of interest still? Yes, there may still be conflict of interest based on the kind of employment agreement you have with the institution, or the kind of, I would say, the kind of offer letter that you have got from your employee per se. Now, all these things are very tricky to handle basically once the invention gets commercialized, once there is a revenue coming from your invention, or even maybe in few cases the IP gets granted, IP is generated and IP is registered. In those cases, it becomes really very difficult for the institution, because they'll have to go through that legal route later on to reclaim, I would say, the inventions or the legal rights. But what if we can do that upfront with something called as intellectual property rights policy? These are some of the case studies that I have discussed, which have happened with me, as in with respect to the clients that we are dealing with, as well as we have seen it a lot of cases as well happening like this. IPR policy is a document which answers all the above questions basically, and lays the guidelines for the institute students, the faculties, as well as with respect to the and ownership working and ownership of any kind of intellectual property rights. When we are saying intellectual property rights, it's just not restricted to patents in this case, basically. There is a lot of IP that is getting generated, and in last 2 years, specifically during the pandemic, there has been a lot of IP with respect to copyright that has been generated. Now, the ownership of those copyright is something also which is very crucial, if it has got some business value coming out of. We'll try to understand, so this is what IP policy is. IP policy basically takes care of all those uncertainties that we have with respect to the IPR filing, IPR ownership, IPR enforcement, and IPR commercialization as well. Now, so that's what IP policy is. And now, what should it actually contain? Ownership of IP, who owns it? Is it the institute? Is it the department? Because in few autonomous institutions, the departments, individual departments are also they have their separate budgets, they get direct funds from the government, wherein the institution is not involved, let's say. In that case, the ownership is with the department, or is it with the institute, or is it with the university, basically. Working with uh, uh, like you know one of the institutions, we realize that the system therein is that, like, the ownership always lies with the university. Basically, it's a private university, right? And so, see, again, IPR policy cannot be a standard document. It has to be customized as per the requirements of the institution or the universities. What kind of IPs, what kind of protections we are going for, in which countries, what is the commercial value coming out of it. All these things need to be included in, need to be included while, I would say, framing the IPR policy. It cannot be a standard document. It has to be a customized document as per the requirements of an institution. When sir said, the honorable principal sir said in his inaugural speech that, we are an independent institution, basically, which is thereafter, affiliated to a particular university, let's say. Then in that case, the ownership issues, so in that, so it has to be customized rather than a standard IPR policy. So the IPR policy, which was drafted by MOE, Minister of Education, or what we called MHRD long back, that was a model draft IP policy, and it has to be customized as per your requirements. Now, disclosure of the inventions, how to do the disclosures, so we have got a practice with some of the institutions wherein every research paper or every thesis, before it gets published or submitted, goes through the IPR cell just to evaluate if there is a potential IP and it can it be protected, basically. This is something about the disclosures, how to disclose that, and can you disclose internally within your ecosystem. That is also not allowed in cases of patenting, basically, right? Now, so disclosure of the invention, how to do, when to do, or maybe so kind of, I would say, not only the inventions but other types of IP as well. That is also something which would be part of IPR policy. Thereafter comes the concept IP licensing and agreements. When you are licensing the IP out, then what kind of clauses you need to have about the payment, royalties, and all. So there is a lot of stuff which is, it's just not like you give me so we go to a shop, give the money and buy an iPhone. It's not like that. There is a lot of due diligence that is required, or there are a lot of things that need to be taken care while licensing out IP. And many times these are legal agreements as well. There are multiple stakeholders. It's just not about one buyer and one the licensor and licensee, but there would be other stakeholders as well. So all these things need to be taken care. Technology transfer. Once you are transferring the technology, what kind of precautions should be taken, or be it to a stakeholder, be it to your collaborator, let's say. So Goa College of Pharmacy is collaborating with, let's say, one particular industry within Goa, and you are developing a joint product, basically. In that case, some kind of technology is transferred from Goa College of Pharmacy to the industry under confidentiality disclosure agreement. Then what should be the things that need to be avoided? What should be the things that need not be in the public domain, and which are under CD? All these things need to be taken care in the IPR policy, basically. Of course, the legal part about enforcement, about infringement, who would actually take the legal action, the damages and all, as well as the actual enforcement proceedings, the legal charges and all, who would take care of all these if at all there is some legal trouble in case of IP, or for example, there is a revocation process against your patent granted in the court. Who is going to bear the charges for that? Right? All these things need to be taken care in the IPR policy. Beyond that, what we also have is what I discussed about conflict of interest. Very clear definition. When can an employee work outside the office hours in a particular area? that is also has to be very clearly mentioned. Dispute resolution with respect to any disputes arising within the faculties, or maybe in cases, let us say, there are two departments from the same institute which are working together, how to resolve those disputes, as well as maybe between the student and a guide if there is any dispute. Jurisdiction, so any kind of dispute which is directly connected to intellectual property rights. Jurisdiction, like at times, for example, like Goa College of Pharmacy works with collaborates with a, let's say, institute in Lucknow, and that point of time, what should be the jurisdiction for patent filing, basically, because it would depend on whose name is involved, like the first applicant or first inventor. Based on that, the jurisdiction would be decided. So what should be the right jurisdiction? All these things need to be included in the IPR policy document. The applicability or a collaborative research, applicability of all these IPs or the different kind of clauses that are included, as well as in case of collaborative research, how it should be done, or who would own the IP basically, and who would do the enforcement, who would take care of the damages, infringements, and all. Funding agencies, nowadays a lot of course, every institution is asking for funding, government funding, research funding coming to them. These research fundings, when they are coming to you, many a times, if you notice, the IP lies with the funding agency, right? So for example, if CSIR or ICMR is giving you a grant for some project, the legal rights are with them basically. So all these clarity need to be there at a academic institution level, how to deal with these things. I'll tell you a case, what happened with us, so we are collaborated, with Hansraj College under Delhi University, and what happened is we are working on a consultancy project. And so Hansraj College comes under University of Delhi. What happened is, when we were discussing about the consultancy fees, in that case, we realized that the consultancy fees, need to be given to the university directly and not to the faculty or the institution. So usually when we get the consultancy, it would be in the name of a faculty or directly in the name of the institution. But in this case, it is coming to DU, and thereafter it would go, certain percentage of that would go to the particular faculty as such. Now, this is the policy for consultancy and research projects that Delhi University has got, and HRC Hansraj College being a part of it, it is something which they have to abide by that basically. So these kind of policy need to be prepared, as per the need of the institute. As I said, drafting a IP policy, it's not a first of all easy task, or it's not something which is a standard, but you have to take into consideration different types of IP. Of course, what you can do is you can use the policy while negotiating with the external funding agencies as well, and or with the collaborators. So it's a framework basically within academic institution. Okay. Now, if you have a internal legal expertise, as the honorable principal sir mentioned, that you already have some IP setup, as well as you're conducting this international conference since last 3-4 years. In that case, you have a legal expertise, draft your own policy as per the needs of the institution. That would be really helpful for the students as well as faculties. How would it be useful for an academic institution? First thing, applicability of IPR policy. As I said, during the lockdown, suddenly, real innovation happened during lockdown. Those of our teachers who were teaching us on the blackboards with the chalk and all, suddenly they are live through Zoom, maybe Google Meet, and using those technology platforms basically, and coming up with lot of content, lot of videos, lot of photographs are there, So there are so many things that are involved into educational activities basically. Now all these things are applicable or protected under copyright. Your notes, teaching material, books, research paper, course material, QIP programs you are conducting, CEP continuous education programs you are conducting, actually distant education program. There are some photographs for the your programs, the theses, the performances in your annual gatherings and all. If it has got some commercial value, in that case, these are the things which are okay. So for example, I'm a teacher, I teach in Mumbai University, and all my lectures I have put on my YouTube channel. All my lectures are there on my YouTube channel. The channel name is Pharma Literati. It's related to pharma only. Now, all these lectures of mine, are they my property or the institute's property? Basically, who owns the copyright? Because eventually when I'm putting them on my YouTube channel, Pharma Literati YouTube channel, that point of time, I am getting some advertising revenue from it. There is some kind of commercialization, of course, happening out of it. Then in that case, if fortunately that amount is really very high, let's say, in that case there is some kind of money involved, so that's why it is called as the intellectual property basically, right? As Miss Prachi had covered in her session. Therein you have the applicability of copyright. In case of patents, of course, you have the inventions. In cases of collaborations or the funding agencies and all, they are the ones who are providing you some kind of guidelines for IPR filing, as well as prosecution and enforcement and all, as well as in cases of trademark. If for example, if you have a startup policy under, if you look at the new education policy NEP, it has now it is allowing the faculty members to have their own startup. It's allowed actually now under new education policy. If you get time, just go through NEP 2020. If a faculty or a researcher or a student has got his or her own firm or startup, in that case there may be certain products or the logos that may be part of trademark or even institute logo or university logo, where to use, where not to use. So for example, when we are doing this program, we have ASSOCHAM logo, IPO logo, and the institute logo included. Can we use that logo without your permission, first of all? Right? All these things need to be taken care in the IPR policies. Finally, the product designs for industrial designs. If you are coming up with a product, basically, I'll tell you, it's more about devices, something like injectable device, something like inhaler device, the meter dose inhalers, dry powder inhalers, MDIs, DPIs, inhalers, nasal sprays, the auto injectors, insulin injectors, and all. You're coming up with a new, let's say, laboratory instrument, like for example, right now I have in front of me a few of these which we filed as a design, like extrudability apparatus you prepare in your lab, or you come up with a medicine dispenser, or you come up with a dissolution, in vitro dissolution device for medicated chewing gum. Now these kind of inventions basically, which are for the design or the product designs, basically those are the ones which are part of design. So all these things need to be included in the IPR policy basically. Finally, how is IPR policy going to be useful? It's going to help you streamline the research and the commercialization, as well as the enforcement process of IP. Definitely, it can help you in terms of your NAC NBA, NIRF rankings, MHRD, IIC if you have at the institution level, entrepreneurship cell if you have at the institution level. It's gonna help you in the activities of that, as well as it would be a policy document actually. In case of collaborations, you clearly have a guideline how to do that in case of licensing and technology transfer basically. So IPR policy, as I said, it's an internal document, but then that would streamline, or because what happens generally, I'll tell you, with most of the institutions, once you have a problem created, we try to identify the solution for that. And many a times, we are not, if we are not in a position to solve that problem at that point of time, in that case, unfortunately, that invention gets killed. Because let me tell you, in the startup ecosystem, since we are working with a lot of startups and incubators as well, the most important thing is also about timing. If you lose the precious time in discussing or evaluating or finding the answers to the problems, in that case you would lose out on the quality of the product as such, or the market of the product as such. So it is very essential to have an IPR policy document internally, which is going to help the institution. Let me just conclude my session with some simple, I would say, best IP or innovation practices that have been used. Actually, I had this opportunity to, like I would say, visit a lot of institutions in India, management institutes, law institutes, the pharmacy, general science institutions, as well as engineering. I mean, every kind of institution, architecture institution. And what I have done is I've got some of the practices, best practices that can be implemented at an academic institution level for promoting the innovation, as well as promoting the IP, as well as the innovation culture among the students. Because for students, remember that we are in an era wherein, like, you know, if you look at typically at the pharma sector, if you look at it, the demand and supply ratio is really, I would say, the demand is very less for the graduates, and the supply is unfortunately really very high. Those of you who are really looking forward to careers, like, you know, great careers, in that case, entrepreneurship or startup provides a wonderful opportunity and option, basically. In that case, take all these things, all these, like, you know, whatever we discussed, or the kind of practices, like, you know, as an opportunity for brainstorming, come up with newer ideas, as well as come up, not only don't stop at filing the IP or getting it protected, try to commercialize the product as well. Because at the end of the day, as sir mentioned in his inaugural speech, what you do in your lab has zero value until and unless it is for the benefit of the society. Whatever you do, whatever kind of impact factor journal you get your research published into, or, like, you know, so that is of no use, basically, if that is not for the society. What practices we have got? Every master's PhD thesis is going through IP cell, establishment of internal IP cell. That is something which is really crucial as such, and I think we have it in our institute, basically. I got this wonderful concept called innovation Dropbox, which was at Chitkara University in Chandigarh. I had this opportunity to visit the university, and we have those complaint box everywhere, right, in each of the institution. But then they came up with this innovation Dropbox concept. The students are encouraged to drop their ideas in the Dropbox. A wonderful idea. I love the idea. I just took a picture with the permission of the university, and using it everywhere to showcase how we can build the innovation ecosystem or culture at academic institution level. The concept is pretty simple. Initially, when this Dropbox was kept, no one was interested in that. Actually, what is this innovation Dropbox? Basically, the students are encouraged to put their ideas into it, not necessarily with respect to their stream or their field. फार्मेसी का बच्चा फार्मेसी की ही आइडिया उसमें लिख के, like he would put or she would put, it's not necessary. Any idea that you feel like, and that idea would go through a rigorous process of, I would say, IP evaluation, commercial evaluation, even and then they would analyze that, and so initially there was not a response, but then the students realized, initially फिर थोड़ा बहुत ideas आने लगा, एक दो ideas, and later on they got good number of ideas coming from students. And if you see, at least many of them got IP protection. They at least went ahead for IP protection. Now see, what happens is, if you start this kind of ecosystem at your institution, that would be something which would be really helpful for the generations to come. Because as I said, the younger generation has got a lot of energy, lot of ideas. Probably they also need some kind of mentoring and guidance, and that's where these kind of, I would say, motivational activities would definitely help them out. Another idea, of course, I don't know whether this is a practice now or not, but IIT Delhi allowed startup instead of a PhD thesis to award the PhD degree. We used to conduct this. There's a concept, like there are a lot of methods for thinking creatively, to imbibe those creative thinking techniques actually, and there are workshops which can be conducted. In fact, we had this opportunity to conduct a lot of creative thinking workshop among students to understand how can they think creatively, the coming out of the box solutions for the normal problems, or reverse thinking, or scamper technique. There are a lot of the techniques basically, these are being done. Of course, this being a government institution may not be possible for us, but then in few institutions, private universities or institutes, a patent is equivalent to monetary benefits. A research paper also is equivalent to monetary benefits. If you get a patent granted, if you get a research paper in a certain impact factor journal, you would be getting some monetary benefits as such. That's what the institution basically did to promote the innovation. Because as I said, nothing works like a monetary motivation for everyone. Let me conclude this with the way ahead, how it can be implemented. Of course, the institution, the faculties, the honorable principals have better clarity about the institution, about to the way ahead, or to I would say the take home message beyond IPR policy. Of course, does the institute have IP policy is one of those questions which need to be answered. Does the institute have IP cell? Is IP part of curriculum for PG and research students? I think in pharma nowadays we have got it as a part of IP curriculum, because I have been teaching at Mumbai University for IPR as a subject. Now I think unfortunately PCI new syllabus guidelines don't include the IP as a subject, and that's a bit unfortunate. But then this is so, for private institution, deemed universities or private universities, this may be one option. Does institute have IP resources to identify patentable inventions? How is the patent filing done? Is there any system to promote research? One of the major problems with commercialization of a research or patent is that people think that I get a patent and I would be Funsuk Wangdu. Everyone knows Funsuk Wangdu, the movie Three Idiots, if you remember. Everyone feels like if I get a patent granted, in that case, someone would come and give, someone like Chatur Ramlingam would come and give me a fat check, $1 million. Hey, I need this patent, and you take this 1 million USD. It doesn't work that way. Practically speaking, we have got almost 13 patents granted, but remember that it's not the patent that gets commercialized. Patent doesn't have a value per se until and unless the product that is protected by that patent has got value. I got a product, I got this iPhone, and it has got market value. If there is a patent which protects this product, in that case only there would be a commercialization or licensing out of the patent. It would never be like मेरे पास patent है and someone would buy it. No, the product should have market value, and that product should be protected, legally protected by the IP. Another wonderful concept, does the institute have an incubation cell? Some of the pharmacy colleges, we have got incubation centers at DPSRU in Delhi, as well as in Ahmedabad. We have got a incubation center at a pharmacy school. We need to think in a way to have an incubation center at academic institution. Incubation center is a concept wherein we help the ideas to get converted into the actual businesses, basically the kind of ecosystem that we provide, of course. And government of India through schemes like AIM, Atal Innovation Mission, even MHRD, MSME, there are a lot of DST as well sponsors a lot of incubation centers. We need to look into it, and if we have that, that would be really good for the students. What is the appreciation for IP generation for faculty members? What is the percentage of profit for the faculty members when IP gets commercialized? We need to answer all these questions, and I think that's where the real value of I would say the IP can be I mean, we would have a real value coming for the IP as such. We need to provide those ecosystem. It's just not for the student, it's for the faculties. And when we have those kind of ecosystem, everyone gets benefited. It's just not the students, it's just not the faculties, the researchers, the master students, everyone in the ecosystem gets benefited with these kind of practices. So this is what I have for the day. I mean, thank you so much for listening to me. I know it's a post-lunch session, very difficult to stay awake as such, but then I would be more than happy to take any questions if there are any as such. And I'll hand this over to Kirti. Yeah, Kirti, over to you.
Thank you so much, sir, for such a great session. I request all the participants to kindly type their questions in the chat box or in the Q&A section, so that we can so that the panelists can answer the questions.
Any question from you, Maithili? Dr. Maithili?
No, it was indeed a very, very interesting session. Can I proceed, Ms. Kirti, with the vote of thanks?
Ma'am, if you don't mind, can we just wait for a couple of minutes so that in case anybody has any questions?
On a lighter note, actually, the students are more used to give answers to questions and the question paper. So they would be not very comfortable asking. They would be having, I'm very sure, because they were all final year students who were attending. So they must be having some questions that I would be getting it later after the session in the classroom.
Yeah, Maithili, I have a question for all the students of your final year BPharm now then.
Yes.
How many patents did Funsuk Wangdu had in the movie Three Idiots? So there was a movie called Three Idiots.
Yeah.
And we had a character called Funsuk Wangdu. Yeah. How many patents did Funsuk Wangdu had? Come on, class. Dr. Maithili thinks that final year BPharm students know, they like to answer the questions. Let us see if there is anyone who can answer my question correctly. Oh, absolutely. The first one, the first one is the right answer actually. So 400
people. Very inquisitive. They are actually very active also. That's why we have actually planned it for our final year students. This batch has been indeed very good. But the only thing is they would not probably, become little comfortable at the very first go. But sure. Students, if you have more doubts, please do type in the QA chat box.
We'll give our email IDs in the chat box, and they can directly mail to us in case they have questions later.
Yes, sure. Thank you so much. I am actually eagerly waiting to thank you. Kirti, shall I start with my?
Sure, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Are there any participants? I would like to still repeat. In case somebody is planning to ask any questions, please go ahead. We can wait since we are not finding. I didn't want them. Yeah, ma'am has shared her email ID. Anytime, I'm sure you can send in the queries if you feel comfortable through the email. Okay. So to begin with my vote of thanks, at the very outset, I from Goa College of Pharmacy would like to sincerely thank Associate Chambers of Commerce and Industry, IPR Council, for the initiative to organize such an event on IPR awareness program among the academic community. A very interesting and informative talk was delivered by Ms. Prachi Pratiti, Examiner of Patents and Designs, Indian Patent Office, Government of India. Ma'am, we were very thankful for this valuable session and truly appreciate for the enthusiasm you exhibit by taking the time out from your busy schedule and imparting the knowledge for the academicians as a whole. I am sure such sessions would motivate young and inquisitive minds to explore the science further for their applicativeness. Thank you. This would not have been possible but for the efforts of Mr. Vijay Kumar Shivpuje, Director, Patlex Business Solutions. His tailored talks and technical expert opinions are always a welcome to give more clarity on details and intricacies. I also thank Ms. Bhavna Mittal, Program Manager, IPFC, for her complete coordination from registration to campaigning about the event, and Ms. Kirti for moderating the session. Last but not the least, I sincerely thank our principal, Dr. Gopal Krishna Rao, who has always ensured that no opportunity is lost without imparting quality education to our students and fellow academicians. Thank you for your constant support and encouragement, sir. Thank you one and all for your lovely session. Ma'am, it was very indeed great listening to you for the detailed encounter of whatever you have given. And Bhavna ma'am, thank you once again for coordinating the whole event. And thank you, Vijay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for having us.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bhavna, we can end the session.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Chalo, bye.
Thank you, Vijay sir. Thank you, Bhavna.